Welcome back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. Now, Squirrel, you had a particularly exciting adventure today getting us ready for podcasting. It seems like the little silicon men
Exciting is one way to put it. My God, I just wanted to bash my head against the keyboard.
But how can that be? You had AI there to help. How could you possibly be having problems?
Oh, man, where do I start? So we're using a new tool because our normal podcasting tool got bought, and it got bought by Descript, and I think Descript is better. At least our audio editor seems to use it a lot and says that it's a good thing, and I'm sure that it is, except I can't find anything because I'm used to where it all was, and I'm now just being a crotchety old guy saying, get off my lawn, and this is frustrating. Why can't I use it the same old way that I did? But here's the point. It looks like the people who have built Descript have followed a kind of standard playbook from the last couple of years. What they've done is they put a giant chat box, and this chat box dominates the home screen that you get to first. And it says, what do you want to do? And you type anything in that you feel like doing, and it helps you to do it, except that it doesn't actually. So my experience is that we want to do a very simple podcast. We don't need dancing bears and sign-ups and subscriptions and who knows what else. I mean, there's a teleprompter here on the screen. I have no idea what I'd do with that except punch it. But there's all kinds of stuff that you can do, and I don't need that. I just need the very simple thing that says record podcast with Jeffrey, send a link to Jeffrey, start recording. And darned if I can't get the AI to do that. It's just impossible because it's all set up and obviously trained to give me all kinds of exciting knobs and whizzy dials and so on. And although it has a lot to say and it's very reassuring and comforting and friendly, it doesn't actually seem to know how to record a podcast. So the thing I want to rant about today with you, Jeffrey, a bit is what's wrong with these chat boxes? Because there are lots of folks who are sticking these all over their software. And I'm sure our listeners are seeing it more and more, that chat to your data, chat here, type here, here's a bot, have this interaction with an AI. And this seems like very, very immature technology. And what I'd really like to see is many more people creating much more sensible interfaces using AI to help them make it, but not necessarily shoving a chatbot in my face. Because if it were embodied and not just made of silicon, I would want to shake it by the lapel. What do you think, Jeffrey?
I think I'm amused a little bit by your story, although I'm sorry you had to go through it, the disappointment. But in listening to it, what I'm thinking of is why people would have imagined that this would work, why the chat problem would work. And it really resonates with my experience because one of my first jobs, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before to you, if not on the podcast, was actually in technical support. So essentially, the chatbot here is an old technology. It just used to be you would reach the chatbot, which was me, via the telephone back when people knew how to dial phones. But there was
But Jeffrey, you have a very, very important characteristic that the AI chatbot does not, which is that you are a human being and you can empathize with me and understand that I'm frustrated. And if I'm yelling and screaming and saying, just how do I record the podcast, you might actually give me instructions for recording the podcast, whereas the AI did not do that.
Yeah, and I think that surprises people. And I think this is kind of like, why do people believe that chat is going to be a solution, is because they have a kind of a broken mental model of what you need versus like the sort of formal knowledge of how to use the software. And they don't understand that the problem isn't one of translation, like language is one of translation, but rather of mental models. That the mental model of the people writing the software, they have a certain mental model of the software in mind, and they're making the mistaken assumption that their users have the same mental model, or at least one that's largely similar. And if you knew their internal vocabulary, if you knew the way that they modeled their software, you would know what to say to the chatbot, and it would probably be very helpful. Of course, if you had that knowledge, you probably wouldn't need the chatbot. So there's kind of a
perfect example. In Descript, there's some concept called a room. I'm sure this is a very useful notion if you want to have a podcast with 50 hosts and 200 guests and I don't know what. It's got some fancy thing, but you have to go to a room. And Jeffrey, you helped me when I was ranting, and you sent me a link to what was a static description of what a room was. It was a web page. It's this old technology that you're talking about here, and it was instructions, and it said click this and click that, and here we are. We're actually recording.
Yeah.
The notion of a room was new to me. I don't know what a room is. I want to record a podcast. And you would think that the AI would be helpful. I'm sure that it will evolve over time and be more helpful, but it couldn't translate Squirrel wants to record a podcast into Squirrel needs to open a room, and here are the detailed, specific instructions. And I think that's one of the key points. I'm writing a whole book about this. I'm so energized about it. So that'll be coming out, I hope, early next year. And the point of the book is that in many, many cases, sticking a chatbot in front of someone, sticking a window that says ask anything, seems like it's a huge advance. But in fact, what happens is that people get confused and lost, and it's not able to help them, and it's far too complicated, and it'd be much simpler to give them something deterministic, something that's defined and understood, and you could use AI to help with that. So it would be great if my friends at Descript, I hope they listen to this and they change to how their system works so that they use the AI internally. They use it for them. And then they could create really helpful text descriptions of stuff to do, like start a podcast. And they could send users to that deterministically. You could choose from a list of things that you wanted to do. And one of them would be record a podcast, and you'd click that and you'd see a list. The AI could help write that list. The AI could help create that list dynamically based on your usage. The only thing you and I do is record a podcast. So they would take me to that immediately. There's so much that you could do to use the AI where it makes sense. Making somebody chat with it is not that thing.
It's interesting because before the podcast, I actually had been reviewing a different article that you sent me that I think may have some elements about why the chat is not a solution. And this was an article on a Substack called Dead Neurons. And the title was, Why the Most Valuable Things You Know Are Things You Cannot Say. And it had to do with kind of the nature of learning and knowledge, and it talks about a distinction which you might consider book smarts versus street smarts. But the point it makes is that the things that you can write in books have to be a certain low dimensionality that you can put them into text. They need to be sort of simple enough that you can get them across easily in language. But that expert knowledge is higher dimensionality. It has more things that go into it, and it requires judgment and fine tuning from the person to be able to develop that expertise over time. And so that we end up in a society where people often value book smarts more than street smarts, even though street smarts are the things that are actually more valuable, but they don't get as much credit because they can't easily be encoded and reproduced.
And that includes being encoded and reproduced in chatbots, as I just demonstrated.
Exactly, and that's exactly it. And so there's this, what it made me think about was I can see the attraction of a chatbot. If your mental model is it will do what a person does and kind of have this sort of expert knowledge, and people have the idea like, well, it'll know everything about our documentation, so it can answer any question. But the problem comes here, I think, in part of this sort of dimensionality, and that when you go to try to give the chatbot directions, of course, you can only do those things, and it can only talk to you the things that are essentially the book smart version, and that are something you can encode in the text. That's the nature of the chatbot. But when I help people with the user interface for software, which I often do with friends and family, I know what I'm doing here is I'm have a higher level mental model in mind, both of what the person is trying to accomplish, but often sort of imagining the minds of the software engineers and the designers, and to guess what they were thinking when they built the software. And so what I'm doing is a bit of sort of role playing of an expert software designer, for example, podcast recording software and thinking, well, what would be in their head as they're designing it, and try to overcome that impedance mismatch. But this is not something that can easily reduce to a set of rules, and my ability to try to help people navigate software generally never really works. There's a level of expertise in here, and the chatbots in the moment are not capable of that. But I understand people's temptation because they feel like, well, it should be able to answer any question, and that seems like, well, if we could have it do anything, Squirrel, if, with that chat text box, and it could just handle anything, isn't that better than having had to work things out deterministically and guess what people might need? Doesn't that seem like it'd be, if we just get like an all-in-one solution, isn't that better than trying to come up with everything bit by bit?
Oh, absolutely. And if I had a time machine, that would be better than trying to do root cause analyses and understand what happened in the past. I could just go back and do things differently. The thing is, it doesn't work. So the key word in what you were saying, you said it can answer any question. The key word is can.
Yeah.
The problem is that although the knowledge is in there, and that's really valuable, and that's what you can capture in deterministic, predictable outputs, that you can get that knowledge into one place in a very well-organized way. Fantastic, do that. But don't shove the chatbot in someone's face when it is not able to do exactly the sort of mind mapping that you're describing there. I know I do that when I teach all the time, and I have the same experience as you with teaching people like my mother-in-law to click the correct buttons. And I have to both imagine what my mother-in-law might be confused about. She just loves to tap buttons at random. So I have to imagine, oh, I bet she probably tapped this button because it looked shiny. And so I have to tell her to click back in order to go back where she was. And I also have to imagine that the designers or whatever it is I'm trying to help her use is not at all thinking about tech-phobic 80-year-old people who tap buttons at random. So that person is not programmed in a back button, so I have to find some other way to go back. And one thing that happens all the time is that I'm doing this on the phone, so I can't actually see what she has on the screen. And that's another difficulty, that Chatbot doesn't have the ability right now to see what I'm looking at and circle something and say, tap that. So we're giving it a very, very difficult customer service job, kind of like the one you had meant those many years ago, but we're not giving it anything like the appropriate tools. So let's stop. And that's the message of my book, is there's so many different things that you can do to create really wonderful apps that have been designed by the AI using all the knowledge, but that don't actually have a chatbot as the interface, or a whole bunch of other techniques, which we don't have time to get into here. But I just encourage our listeners, if you're thinking about putting a chatbot in and a text box on your screen, please stop and really consider whether that works. And you might try my mother-in-law. She's available for focus groups. So, get in touch with me, and I'll consider having her play with it. And you will rapidly find out that she is not helped at all by the chatbot, just like I wasn't today when it could not make that mental mapping for me.
Now, as always, we'd love to talk to our listeners about their experiences. I mean, there could be a chatbot out there that's perfectly suited to its job. Maybe there's some constraints or enabling factors that make it incredibly useful. I'm at the moment, my experience is like yours, Squirrel. I haven't come across that chatbot yet. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If someone has an example of like, here's a place where the chatbot is actually excellent and useful, and I'm really happy it's there, I would love to have the counterexample. Maybe you can come up with a general model of when you have the right context where chatbots are a good solution. Or maybe we'll find more people agreeing with us that actually chatbots are not ready for prime time yet. But I'd be curious to see what other people have to say. How do you feel about that?
I feel great about it, and guess what? We're human, not silicon, so if you chat with us, we'll actually give you some helpful responses. And the best way to do that, we do not have Jeffrey AI and Squirrel AI, and we're not planning to create them, although I know some people who are doing that on their websites. Our website is agileconversations.com, and there you can find ways to do the old school variety of getting in touch with us, typically email, but we also have all the other things like X and Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook Facebook and Instagram and who knows, whatever people invented this week for OpenClaw to talk to. We probably have that. And you can find that all on agileconversations.com, as well as our book, the one we've already written that you can buy, and also a lot of free stuff on conversational dojos and lots of other techniques for having better conversations with humans. Maybe also chatbots, but mostly humans. So please get in touch with us there. We'd sure like to hear from you, including if you disagree or if you have a counterexample like Jeffrey described. Of course, there are two other ways to keep in touch with us. One of them is to come and see us in Helsinki, and that's in just a couple of weeks now. So you can still sign up, right, Jeffrey?
Absolutely.
Yep, so and it's going to apparently be focused on AI, although I may be sat in a corner throwing rocks. I'm not sure. But it's going to be one of the best conferences you'll ever go to, with some very, very clever people called KitCon, and that's CITCON, and if you type that into Google, you'll find it quickly. There'll also be a link in the show notes. Finally, of course, there's one more way to keep in touch with us, which is to come back next week when we'll have another edition of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.